The morning sun had barely touched the hills when Jake saw them. A cloud of dust rising from the valley. Dozens of riders. The land baron had finally made his move. Jake loaded his rifle and tightened his hat. He had defended this ranch his whole life, and he wasn't about to lose it now. The sisters stood behind him, fear written on their faces. The first clutched her dress, trembling. The second cursed under her breath, pacing nervously. And the third, the one who claimed to be his wife, stood calm, her eyes fixed on the riders. Jake growled, "Get inside. Whatever happens, stay low." But the third sister shook her head. "No, Jake. If I am truly your wife, I fight beside you." Jake stared at her for a long moment. There was no fear in her eyes, only fire. Something inside him stirred. Maybe, just maybe, she was telling the truth. The riders stormed in, guns glinting in the sun. At the front, the land baron himself, a man with greed etched into his smile. He shouted across the field, "Jake Morgan, this land is mine. Hand it over or die with it." Jake raised his rifle, his voice steady. "You'll take this land over my dead body." The land baron smirked. "That's the plan." And with that, chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air. Bullets tore into the wooden fence. Horses neighed. Dust exploded across the yard. Jake fired back, dropping to riders instantly. The ranch became a battlefield. The first sister screamed, ducking inside. The second grabbed a pistol, trying to help, but her hands shook too much to aim. And the third, she fought like hell, reloading quickly, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jake, covering his blind spots. For every bullet Jake fired, she fired another. For every rider he dropped, she saved him from the next. When the smoke cleared, only a handful of the land baron's men were left. The rest lay scattered across the dirt. But the baron himself still stood tall. He raised his revolver, aiming straight at Jake. "Enough games, cowboy. Say goodbye." Before he could fire, the second sister screamed, running between them. "No, this wasn't the plan. We were only supposed to scare him." The baron fired. The bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her to the ground. The truth was out. She and the first had been pawns in the baron's game all along. Rage surged through Jake. He raised his rifle and shot the revolver clean out of the baron's hand. The baron fell from his horse, crawling in the dirt. Jake stood over him, breathing heavy. "This ranch stays mine, and if you ever come back, it'll be your last mistake." The baron spat dust, fear finally breaking his arrogance. He fled into the horizon with the last of his men. The ranch was silent once more. Smoke drifted through the air. The first sister wept quietly, holding the wounded second. They were broken, pawns used in someone else's war. But the third, she stood proud, her hands still steady, her eyes locked on Jake's. Jake lowered his rifle. "So, was it true? Were you ever really my wife?" She reached into her dress and pulled out a small locket. Inside, a picture. Jake's picture from years ago, long before his solitude began. Her voice cracked, but her words were strong. "Yes, Jake, I was your wife. You left me when the war took everything from us. I searched for you, and now I found you again." Jake's heart pounded. Memories long buried came rushing back. He remembered her now. The nights under the stars, the promises they once made. Tears stung his eyes. "My God, after all this time." She took his hand, her grip firm, unshaken. "No more running, Jake. We stand together now." As the sun set over the battered ranch, Jake Morgan stood beside the only woman who had never abandoned him. The land was safe. The lies were burned away. And the cowboy, who once thought he was destined to ride alone, finally had someone to ride with. Because in the Wild West, a man could lose everything. But sometimes, fate gave it back. It was a quiet evening on the edge of the Wild West. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky with fire and dust. On that lonely ranch, Jake Morgan worked in silence. The kind of silence only a man who had lost too much could ever understand. He had no wife, no children, no family left. Just his land, his horses, and the ghosts of a past he never spoke about. But that evening, his life changed forever. From the distance, the sound of horses echoed across the plains. Not one, not two, but three riders cutting through the dust. As they came closer, Jake's hand instinctively went to the revolver on his hip. Strangers rarely brought good news. The horses stopped in front of his ranch gate, and there they were, three beautiful women, dressed in western gowns, their eyes sharp, their presence commanding. The first spoke softly, almost tenderly. "Jake Morgan, don't you recognize me?" Jake's brows furrowed. "Lady, I don't recall ever meeting you." The second sister leaned forward, her voice bold and fearless. "One of us is your wife, Jake, and it's your job to figure out which one." The third remained silent. Her eyes were cold, unreadable, but she watched Jake like a hawk, as if she knew more about him than he knew about himself. Jake laughed bitterly. "My wife? I never had a wife. You must be mistaking me for some other poor fool." But the first woman shook her head. "No, Jake. You did, and you left her behind. One of us carries the truth and the proof." Jake's heart skipped. For the first time in years, doubt crept into his mind. That night, the sisters stayed at the ranch. Jake didn't trust them, not even for a second. But he needed answers, and if there was even a chance that one of them spoke the truth, he had to know. At supper, Jake asked questions. "What was my mother's favorite song?" The first sister answered quickly. "Shenandoah. She used to sing it every morning." Jake froze. That was true. His mother had indeed sung that song. Then he asked another question. "What happened the night I broke my arm?" The second sister smirked. "You fell from a horse trying to impress the ranch hands." Jake frowned. That was wrong. He had broken his arm in a saloon brawl, not a fall. Finally, Jake turned to the silent sister. "Well, do you know?" She looked into his eyes, her voice steady. "You broke it in a fight, defending a man who didn't deserve it." Jake's breath caught. That was the truth. For the next 2 days, the sisters tested him as much as he tested them. The first was gentle, kind, almost too perfect. The second was fiery, full of charm, but careless with details. And the third, she was a mystery. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. Still, something felt wrong. Why now? Why had these women come after all these years? On the third night, Jake went into town, searching for answers. At the saloon, he found one, in the form of a drunken cowboy slumped over the bar. "Careful, Jake," the man slurred. "Those women, they ain't here by chance. Someone sent them. Someone who wants your land." Jake grabbed him by the collar. "Who sent them?" The drunk whispered, almost choking on his words. "The land baron. He wants every acre, and he'll use any trick to get it." Jake returned to the ranch with fire in his eyes. At dawn, he confronted the sisters. "Enough games. Tell me who sent you." The first sister gasped. "We came because the truth had to be known." The second tried to argue, but her voice trembled. We had no choice." And then the third finally stepped forward. Her eyes locked on Jake's, steady, unflinching. "I am your wife, Jake. I always was. The other two were sent to confuse you, to break you. But I will not lie anymore." The silence was heavy. Jake didn't know what to believe. But before he could demand proof, the sound of hooves thundered again across the ranch. This time, it wasn't three women. It was an army of riders.